But we also seem to well, perhaps. You never know.
Impressive backdrop.
Yeah, impressive backdrop. So it's really my pleasure to welcome NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte to Sweden and to this facility for education and training for our civil defense here in Revinge, next to Revinge here, where the military troops are trained. And today's NATO summit is also the first time that Sweden is hosting a NATO ministerial meeting, and we really do that with great pride. Yesterday evening we had a working dinner on board a Swedish Coast Guard ship, where we discussed the big commitments of ours to counter the Russian shadow fleet, and as you know we've done so quite significantly lately. And of course we also discussed the broader security challenges we face right now, as well as Sweden's ongoing integration into NATO. My main message, and I do think you will agree when I say this, to the Secretary General, is that Sweden, we take our responsibilities as a NATO ally very seriously. With a strong sense of urgency and solidarity. We are carrying out our largest increase in defense spending since the end of the Cold War. Sweden estimates reaching NATO's 5% commitment by 2030. Today's field visit here is a way to showcase our total defense concept, a good example of Sweden's steadfast commitment to strengthen security and defense in Northern Europe through resilience and preparedness. And as we have learned today, Sweden's defense is a broad collective system, not a state-only function, and not only the responsibility of the armed forces. Civil defense is crucial to support military operations, to safeguard the most essential public services, and to protect the civilian population. Our civil defense includes the government, municipalities, businesses, NGOs, and most importantly, our citizens, of course. Swedish citizens are expected to take personal responsibility with preparedness at home as well, awareness of their role in crisis or war. It also includes a strong psychological defense. And at the top of all this, I, as you know, Mark, have appointed a Minister for Civil Defense. Yeah, I'm quite sure he is somewhere here. He's always present, actually. Yeah.
Working in the background.
Exactly. We have, as you heard, improved the quality of our bomb shelters and rescue services. We have learned a lot from Ukraine, which has suffered indiscriminate, brutal Russian attacks affecting civilians, including hospitals and children in schools. The rescue services have played a vital role in safeguarding Ukrainian society. The lessons for us is clear. We need to increase the capacity of our rescue services, and that is exactly what we are doing and what we have seen here today. And this is only the starting point. Our military and civilian conscripts, together with professionals and volunteers, they deliver a credible military and civil defense every day. So allow me here today just say thank you for your service, for your dedication, for your hard work, and your strong will to defend. Thank you so much. To meet the long-term security threats and challenges, we will continue to invest in our armed service. Sweden's defense industry is a perfect example of a high-tech powerhouse driven by innovation and increased production. With around 380 defense companies, we deliver defense capacity by air, land and sea. We will mobilize the private sector for security of supply. We will involve the Swedish population through conscription, and we will continue to strengthen our cyber security, because security of the Swedish people and of NATO allies is our primary priority. So thank you so much for being here, and over to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Prime Minister, dear Ulf, thank you for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you in Sweden and to be with you here today and to see what is happening and what you are doing. It's really impressive. I saw firsthand what Sweden's total defense concept is all about. Military and civilian conscripts training together to provide search and rescue, emergency care, the transport of wounded civilians, drone detection, to name only a few elements. We also saw the close cooperation between public authorities, emergency services, the armed forces, and also the private sector. It was, and it is, very impressive. And this is what I believe resilience looks like. And it is exactly what we need in today's security environment. Defense is not only about armed forces. It is also about keeping society functioning, protecting people, securing critical infrastructure, maintaining supplies. In short, this is about making sure that every part of society is prepared. And Sweden understands very well that security is a whole of society responsibility. Dear Ulf, since joining our alliance only 2 years ago, Sweden has become stronger and Sweden has made NATO stronger. With advanced military capabilities, a strong defense industry, world-class defense technology, and, as we have seen today, deep experience with resilience and total defense. Sweden is the framework nation for NATO's forward land forces in Finland and contributing to the forward land forces in Latvia. This further strengthens our eastern flank and our deterrence and defense posture in the Nordic region. Sweden's defense industry is a high-tech powerhouse, and I welcome your plans to move quickly to increase defense spending to 3.5% of GDP by 2030. I know you're doing this because it's what today's security environment demands. And I hope, of course, that even more allies follow this accelerated timeline. When it comes to the threats to our society, we know there are many. I commend Sweden for the steps you are taking against Russia's shadow fleet. It was very impressive last night to hear the stories. Vessels that help Russia evade, the shadow fleet, these are vessels that help Russia evade sanctions and finance its war of aggression against Ukraine. That matters for Sweden, it matters for the Baltic Sea region, and it matters for the security of all allies. That is exactly what NATO is for, the security of all allies. And let there be no mistake, our ability and our resolve to defend every ally are absolute. Were anyone to be so foolish as to attack, the response would be devastating. Turning to Ukraine, since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, Sweden has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine. Your military assistance includes tanks, combat vehicles, air defense, advanced weapon systems, ammunition training, and airborne surveillance and control aircraft. You are supporting Ukraine's defense industry, including through the production of long-range drones and missiles, and you are providing direct investment in Ukraine's defense industrial base. I want to thank you. I want to thank Sweden for its contributions to Ukraine, also to Pearl, the prioritized Ukraine requirement list, ensuring rapid delivery of crucial US equipment and munitions to Ukraine. More support is coming through Pearl, and I encourage all allies to keep contributing to this vital initiative. Because supporting Ukraine is not charity. It is an investment in our shared security. Later today and tomorrow, NATO foreign ministers will meet in Helsingborg. And indeed, this is the first NATO foreign ministers meeting hosted by Sweden. There we will prepare the ground for the Ankara summit, including on defense investment, industrial production, capabilities, and continued support for Ukraine. In Ankara, we must show that we are making real progress, that we are delivering, that means producing more, strengthening our supply chains and stockpiles, producing faster, and ensuring that our militaries have what they need to deter and defend. And I I can count on Sweden to continue leading by example and delivering on its commitments. Prime Minister, dear Ulf, thank you for the excellent hospitality and for Sweden's steadfast contributions to NATO.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Please.
With that, we'll go over to some questions in group. We can start with TT, second from the left here.
So my name is Cornelia Michelsen and I represent Sweden's national news agency, TT. You have previously referred to a no surprise agreement with President Trump, but given the recent developments when we have seen what some would describe as surprises when it comes to US withdrawals, or at least as very sudden, how successful do you think that that agreement has been, or how can you guarantee that this will not continue? And secondly, we have also seen some open conflicts between allies. So what do you hope that Mark Rubio, what key message do you hope that he will give during the meeting in Helsingborg?
Well, to start with the second part of the question, when it comes to allies sometimes having debates, we are democracies. We love to debate. But in the end, we always come together, the 32 of us. And you have seen this all over the history of NATO, 77 years almost. Always debates, always discussions, but in the end, we come together. That's the big difference with Russia or China, where one person decides what everybody should think. By the way, they think different things, but he thinks, the leader, that everybody agrees. We know it's not true. We need to debate. That makes us stronger. To your first question, let's zone out a little bit. Europe and Canada have ramped up their spending on defense. Last year, you've seen huge increases in defense spending. The whole of the alliance at 2%, committing in The Hague to reach the 5%, and Sweden now having decided to reach the core defense spending target already by 2030. This is huge, and it is necessary because in the end we cannot be over-reliant and keep on having the over-reliance on one ally. It's simply not healthy. And this is exactly what we agreed with the United States, that they will stay involved, of course, with the nuclear umbrella, but also conventional, but that the Europeans will take more care of their own defense, step by step in a way where it will not, of course, lower the overall deterrence and defense of NATO. The rotational forces involved in the announcements do not have an impact on NATO's defense plans. The other discussion going on about the US contribution to the NATO force model, this is happening for a year. We have a process in place. This is normal business. And this is exactly what we wanted. Europeans doing more, a stronger Europe and a stronger NATO, so that the US can pivot more, for example, towards Asia, over time, step by step, in a structured approach. And this is exactly what's happening.
We'll take the next question from the lady in red here.
I have two questions. At this very moment, or within the last couple of hours, a drone has again entered Baltic airspace, I guess over Latvia this time. So what can NATO do to deter Russia from redirecting these drones? Because it doesn't seem to be working. And at the same time, it's being reported that the JEF is working on creating a sort of military command structure that could operate outside of NATO if necessary. You look surprised. Read The Economist and others. So, I mean, I'm not optimistic on my answer. I'll get from you. But if this is true, does this strengthen NATO because it then would be a European pillar, a decision-making pillar inside NATO, or is that a sign that the alliance is more fractured? Thank you.
Well, if I start with the second part of the question, no, obviously not. I mean, JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, not that well known to everybody perhaps. I mean, that's a kind of a cooperation. Nowadays within NATO, we were part of JEF also before we became full members of NATO, so it's certainly not an alternative. It's a kind of a way of having rapid responses, obviously useful when we have the Baltic sentry after all these sudden and very strange damages on underwater cables, for example. So absolutely important, and perhaps increasingly important given the fact that we are so close to Russia. but obviously not as an alternative, but as part of NATO.
Yeah, to your first question, I mean, Ukrainian drones are there not because Ukraine wants to work with drones. They are there because of the full-scale Russian attack against Ukraine having to defend itself. NATO is always prepared for every eventuality. And what happened over the last couple of days again is what we trained and prepared for. And this is a calm, decisive and proportionate response to any threat. And that's exactly what happened through the Baltic air policing mission from Lithuania, when it comes to Latvia, when it comes to Lithuania. This is what people can be assured of. NATO is always there to defend every inch of NATO territory.
But how do you stop it?
Well, you stop it by making sure that anyone, of course, when it comes to Ukrainian drones, again, they are not there because Ukraine wanted to send drones. They are there because of this war of aggression by the Russians. This is where this all started. And when a drone, whether it is from Ukraine or from Russia, is presenting a threat, then we are there to make sure that we do everything.
Take the woman in the blue shirt and then the man in the blue jacket here.
A quick follow-up on the drones. I saw the Polish defense minister today said that Ukraine must be more precise in using drones after we've seen this string of incidents. A comment to that. And then also for the Secretary-General, Russia on Thursday delivered nuclear munitions to field facilities in Belarus, and we are seeing exercises there. How does NATO assess this?
Well, when it comes to exercises, they happen all over the place. Of course, we monitor them closely.
Well, it's my firm belief that the Ukrainians are they certainly don't want their drones to end up on friendly territory for obvious reasons. Sometimes it's a matter of jamming, sometimes it's a matter of other disturbances, and obviously they do not want them to happen because it could create damage, it could create fear, of course. But I think you should also realize that there is Russian willingness to give the impression that other countries are kind of doing things that are not legitimate, and that's why we should really not be open for the Russian narrative on this, but instead, of course, help the Ukrainians as much as we can to help them direct their attacks in the right directions, of course.
There was this ridiculous claim by the Russians that Latvia was somehow supporting this. Totally ridiculous, and the Russians know this.
Alex Maxia from The Times. A question for both the General Secretary and Prime Minister. Mark Rutte, you mentioned asking countries to spend the 0.25% of their GDP for Ukraine. Now that it's going well on the battlefield there, do you think that this can help rebuild support for Ukraine and help Kyiv win the war? And also an additional question, more specifically, what should these additional resources, if you get it, if the countries agree, what would they be used for?
They are not additional. Basically what we need is about this amount of spending by allies when it comes to the support for Ukraine. The problem is that it is not evenly distributed now within NATO. So there is a limited amount of countries, including Sweden, which is really punching above its weight when it comes to the support for Ukraine. And other countries like Canada and Germany, the Netherlands and Denmark and Norway. And also a couple of others. But there are also many not spending enough when it comes to the support for Ukraine. This is why I made a proposal. The proposal will not get unanimity, so it will not work. But it has at least started a debate between allies that if we all are saying that Ukraine has to make sure that it stays in the fight as strong as possible and to bring this fight to a peace, then of course we all have to chip in an equal manner. And that debate is now at least heavily taking place in NATO, and that's very good.
Okay, next.
Sweden is the third largest donor of military support in absolute terms, and that we are proud to be that. So no buts, but it would be far better if more countries competed with our size of support. for obvious reasons, and in the long term. Now we have the 90 billion euros loan on place. That's great, but that is not a way to that's not a way to exclude or a way to decrease the national supports, because this is a war that will go on as long as the Russians don't comply to decent conditions for peace. And that's why we need to be long-term and firm in our support. So I really would like more countries that speak so extremely well about Ukraine to also put the money where the mouth is.
Okay.
Well, we are doing joint efforts all the time, I would say.
Swedish
Step by
radio.
step.
Swedish radio over there, then SVT.
Yes, a question for Mark Rutte. You keep saying that the defense industry in Europe needs to ramp up. They need to step up, deliver more. On the same time, the defense industry feels a bit insecure that once they ramped up, that the interest for their products will decline. How can NATO, so to say, ease their mind so they, dare taking the risk of ramping up, building up?
These are commercial companies. I worked in a commercial company for 10 years, not in the defense industry, but in a commercial company. Commercial companies are there to make sure that when there are business opportunities, you grasp them. There is now a huge business opportunity because in NATO, we are spending so much more. The US is spending more, but look at Europe and Canada. I mean, getting into on an equal footing when it comes to the overall defense spending with the US. Tens and tens and tens of billions each year, hundreds of billions over the coming years coming in. Look at Germany, doubling its defense spending in 29 compared to 21, over 150 billion by 29. And we know that about 20-30% of defense spending goes to the defense industry. So the money coming in, massively. Now we have to make sure that Sweden, the Netherlands and all the other NATO allies are not buying for a higher price the same. No, they have to buy more for at least the same price or lower. And that means more production lines, more production capacity. The good news is that most defense industrial companies get this, that the financial sector gets it. I had a meeting yesterday with a wide variety of financial sector organizations and banks and companies discussing this, making sure that what can they do to support the defense industry doing it. And it is something where we have a problem here, but also in the US. The US has exactly the same problem. You've seen the American president being very forceful with the big primes in the US, forcing them to quadruple the production. And I spoke with one of those CEOs a couple of days later. He was still trembling from that meeting in the White House. So that was good news. But I think in the end we will get there. And I think you will see in Ankara, where this is a main issue to be discussed, that a lot is happening. And again here, Sweden is helping, because you had already traditionally a very broad defense industrial base. Here also discussion is going on, how can we produce more for the whole of the alliance, and that's good news.
So in your opinion, it's not a risk for the defense industry, it's more of an opportunity?
It's a huge opportunity, and because the money is there, and we know that the money has to be spent, and we can, of course, we need the men and women in uniform, first of all, but we also, we need for them to have the gear necessary to fight the war, and therefore you need the defense industrial output.
And let's also recognize the fact that these are complicated markets, for obvious reasons. They're extremely long term, they are built on political decisions, but I think that for very unfortunate reasons, these companies, they are actually convinced that we are here for the long term. And also it requires some kind of public support as well. We have in a quite rapid manner gone from a situation where these companies quite often were kind of mistaken for something unsustainable, almost something you shouldn't do at all, until today, where I saw one of these small Swedish companies, they had defending democracy as the payoff to their company name. So I think there is something changing right now for unfortunate reasons, but still, that's a good sign.
Now a short final question from SVT.
So Tomorrow, the Americans are expected to present their contribution to the NATO force model. Will this be discussed on the ministerial meeting, and what do you expect when it comes to numbers and speed?
Yes, I have some insight on what might happen. It will also be discussed in other fora. It might also come up tomorrow. What I would say here is that I'm not worried. Why not? Because this is exactly what we discussed over a year now. Europe's stepping up, Canada stepping up, spending more, taking more responsibility for our own defense, ending the over-reliance on one ally. Don't forget, in Europe you have about 550 to 600 million people living. US, 350 million, and then we have Canada. Our main adversary has a population of between 120 million and 140 million. You cannot have a situation where around 600 million people have to defend themselves against a country with 120 to 140 million people, an economy the size of the Dutch and the Belgian economy combined, and cannot do that without having an over-reliance on another country of 350 million people. So it's right that we rebalance this for the US also to be able to pivot more towards other theaters. Being conscious of the fact that when it comes to the defense of the US mainland, also the European part of NATO is crucial. You could argue that the defense of the US mainland starts in Norway. Why? Because that's where we have to make sure that these nuclear submarines from Russia don't pose a threat to the US mainland. So we are in this together, but this over-reliance has to stop. What will be announced later this week and next week by the US, I think is absolutely doable, and it's exactly why we had a process in place starting last year, then coming to conclusions in The Hague when it comes to defense spending. So that's a structured, business as normal process.
Thank you. And with that, we will conclude this press conference. The Prime Minister will now lead the Secretary-General to his car, and the Prime Minister will then be back for single interviews. So journalists remain seated.